Good afternoon and welcome back to Freelance Business Week. We've got a great presentation scheduled for you this afternoon. We're working with our accounting friends in Sarasota, Florida at Kirkring Barbario Group. The PPP loan process has been quite a bit of a mystery for a lot of freelancers. Many have wondered whether it applied to them, what they could take advantage of, what grants were available, how that all would work out. So thought I'd bring these friends of ours in today to help solve some of those mysteries and help us to account for PPP loan forgiveness to maximize our opportunities there. So I wanted to introduce first Patricia Ensminger Cpa. She's a shareholder with Kirkring Barbario and Company in Sarasota, and she concentrates her practice and specializations on CFO services, internal audits, the analysis and design of internal control systems, forensic accounting, and developing programs to assess compliance and governmental regulations. Ms. Ensminger joined KB in 1999, and she was admitted as a shareholder in 2006. And with Trish today is Nels Matson, CPA. He joined KB in 2018, and he provides comprehensive tax, outsourced accounting, and consulting services to individual and business clients. And since March this year, Nels has really dedicated himself to keeping KB's clients up to date on the ever-changing PPP loan process and the forgiveness guidelines that have evolved over the last several weeks and months. A few housekeeping items before we get rolling here. The chat box questions you can provide to us are down all the way at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to communicate with us there and we'll get your questions answered. I have a bit link that I'll be bringing up on the screen during the presentation, and also over at the right of your screen that shows the download for the PPP loan forgiveness checklist that they have provided. And be sure to upvote if you enjoy the presentation. And with that, we will go ahead and let Trish and Nels take it away. So thanks very much for joining us today, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Paula. And thanks, everyone, for having us here. Nels and I are really excited to go over the PPP loan forgiveness application with you today. And like Paula mentioned, Nels and I have led our team, our firm, through the PPP process, and we've been in the trenches since March. So today, our agenda, we're going to go over the PPP loan forgiveness applications and considerations for sole practitioners. We're going to discuss how to account for your PPP loan, best practices in searching for local financial resources, and a couple tips on how to empower a business owner financially, what to do during these trying times. So what is the Payroll Protection Plan loan? So we're going to back up a little bit to a few months ago when everybody started talking about the PPP loans. So the Payroll Protection Loan is a forgivable loan if the funds are spent on payroll, rent, mortgage interest, or utilities. It was passed as part of the CARES Act. And as you know, as the PPP loan came out, there was a lot of questions, unanswered information. And so in June 5th, they put out another amendment to the PPP loan through the Ppp Flexibility Act. And that had some great advantages to everybody who was either applying for or receiving the PPP loan. It extended the amount of time to use the funds from 8 to 24 weeks. As we know, a lot of businesses aren't even up and running at full capacity yet. So that really gave businesses extra time to spend the money. And they dropped the payroll requirement as a percentage of all forgivable expenditures from 75% to 60%. So what that means is in the first round of PPP, when the regulations came out, you had to spend at least 75% of those funds on payroll. With only 25% allowed for rent, mortgage interest, utilities. But when this act came out, they dropped that to 60%. So it's a 60-40 mix, which was helpful to a lot of businesses in order to make the full forgiveness. The PPP is administered by the SBA, but you originally applied for the loan through your bank, and it will be the same bank that you received your loan where you will apply for your forgiveness. What did the PPP loan application require? So go back a little bit in time and remember kind of the headaches and pains when you filled out the application. So it was 2019 average monthly payroll cost. And what's included in payroll is gross wages. So employee's net check, adding back the employee's side of Social Security and Medicare and withholding. It does not include what the employer pays towards those taxes, so it's only the employee's portion. It does allow for employer-paid retirement benefits and health insurance benefits, and then any state unemployment compensation type taxes that the employer pays, those also count as payroll costs. So that's when you see on the loan forgiveness application and your original application payroll, that's what they define payroll as. It also included your 2019 employee headcount. The headcount is where you put it on your actual loan application, what your headcount was. So if you're a sole practitioner with no employees, it would have been a 1. If you're a practitioner that also has wages to a few employees, you would have put 3 if you had 2 employees. It does not include independent contractors, though. That was kind of unknown in the beginning. It's actual employees. But all of this said, throw some of this out the window because the PPP loan forgiveness application defines the terms a little differently. So we'll go into that, and then we'll walk through an application for forgiveness. Nels will go through each part of that in a little bit. Are there any questions? So we have a question. So 1099 partners not included. So if you're a sole practitioner and have a Schedule C on your 1040, that's what you'll use. Your net income will be your wages, or your profit will equal wages. But no 1099 contractors are included in the amounts that get forgiven. They are not considered wages. In the first round of documents that came out from the SBA when people were applying for the loans, it did say independent contractors, but then they came out with questions and answers, and they took that out of the regulations. So no, it does not include 1099 contractors.
And one of the reasons too that they did that is because the person that receives the 1099 can go ahead and they could have applied for a PPP themselves.
Right, so they didn't want it double counted. They didn't want both the business and then the independent contractor receiving the PPP funds. Some key terms to keep in mind when you're filling out your forgiveness application. They defined what an FTE was. That was also an unknown in the beginning, but it's hours worked by employee divided by 40. You can never have more than 1 per employee. So even if you have an employee that works 60 hours or 80 hours in a 1-week period, you cannot have more than 1 FTE for that employee. The cover period is defined as the date that you received your funds. So when you actually receive the loan funds in your bank account is when your cover period starts. And Nels will go in a little bit on the application how the cover period is used. There's also an Fte Comparison Test. So this, you can elect to either use 2 periods of time. You can either elect to use February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 to February 29th, 2020. And those periods are used to compare to the FTEs during your cover period. So your cover period is the date, starts the date you receive the funds in your bank account and goes out 24 weeks now with the expanded. So 8 to 24 weeks. Or any time in between when you've used all your funds and want to apply for your loan forgiveness application. And then the wage test comparison period is January 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2020. And what that is, it compares the wages paid in that test period to what you're paying in your cover period. And again, with the FTE comparison, you'll want to look, if you have employees as part of your business, you'll want to look to see which one of those 2 periods are most advantageous. So you'll want to take the period that has less FTEs to compare to where you are now during your cover period. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Nels, and he's going to go through the actual application.
Okay, so now that we got all the FTE and wage reductions and all of that defined, I'm going to try to show you how not to have to do those. So there are 2 possible forms. There's the 3508 and there's the 3508EZ. So as you can see, these 2 boxes, the 3508 is a little bit more involved than the 3508EZ. So the 3508 is comprised of 3 worksheets. So the first is a Schedule A worksheet, And on here, you're comparing two types of employees. So those that are under and those that are over 100,000.
And now Form 3508, that's the actual forgiveness application.
Yeah, sorry. So that's the actual forgiveness application. So what you'll be applying for with the bank. And then on the Schedule A, so you filled out Schedule A worksheet. Then on the Schedule A, you're going to be bringing that information from the worksheet into Schedule A and adding onto it your owner's compensation, which most of you will have, and then the employer-paid health insurance, employer-paid retirement benefits, and also those state taxes that Trish mentioned. So those will come into the Schedule A. And then on the forgiveness calculation form, which really is just, that's all you have to do for the 3508EZ, you're going to sum up all of those things and then add in your non-payroll costs. And I'm going to break that down a little bit more in the next few slides.
So now 3508 has 3 components, right? And the 35EZ has 1. So
Right.
You'll want to shoot for.
So we're going to try to, as you'll see, we're going to try to keep it easy. So how can you qualify for the EZ form? We're going to go through 3 different boxes that you can check. So if you check only one of these 3, you'll be able to qualify for the EZ and not have to go through all those 3 applications, or 3 forms, 3 sheets. So the first option is this option most of you will probably fall into. So this is if you're a self-employed individual, independent contractor, or a sole proprietor who had no employees at the time of when you applied for the original loan, and you didn't include any of employee salaries in the computation when you were computing that loan amount. So this is option 1. And are there any questions about option 1? Because this is where probably most of you will fall into. All right, I'm going to go on to option 2. Oh, there is. So the question here is, I heard on the news that loans of less than 150,000 are automatically forgiven. Have they decided on that? So that's still in legislation that hasn't been passed into law yet. So some of the banks are actually waiting on taking loan applications under 150,000 because of that. So it may be advantageous to hold off on doing the application for that reason. So that's a good question.
We're guiding our clients to wait. Don't spend all the time to gather all the extra documentation and fill out the forms until we see how that transpires. But the banks are pushing hard for that anybody under 150,000 would just have to certify they spent the money for the purpose, but it's not passed yet.
Right. Okay, so the second option is the borrower did not reduce annual salary, so the borrower being you, did not reduce your annual salary or hourly wages. So this is, you did not reduce your rate of pay by more than 25% during your covered period compared to first quarter of 2020. And you didn't reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of the employees between January 1st and the end of the covered period. So this is option 2. So we have a question, how does the SBA view an LLC? I know the IRS views a single owner LLC different than the state of Florida. Sure.
So the LLC would be viewed by the SBA on how you file the tax return. So a single member LLC can either go on your Schedule C on your 1040, or you have done an S election and file an S Corp tax return. So that's how they would view you depending on what you actually file with the IRS.
Another good question. Okay, so option 3 is a lot like option 2. So the first part of it is going to be the same. So you did not reduce your annual salary or hourly wages of any employee by more than 25% compared to first quarter of 2020. And then this is where this option varies, and you are unable to operate at the same level of business activity before February 15th due to compliance with requirements issued by the HHS, the CDC, or OSHA. So that's where this one varies. So you just were not, you have those same, that you did not reduce salary or wages or your FTEs, and then the other are, sorry, wages, and then that your activity was reduced due to one of those compliance requirements. So now we'll get into the loan itself. So this is what the easy loan forgiveness calculation form looks like. And it's broken down into two main components. There's the loan information, and then there is the actual calculation of the loan forgiveness. So this is the top part. This is the loan information. And if you guys did the original application yourself, you can see that this looks very familiar, this top part, as to your original loan when you filed for the PPP loan. So it's going to include your business name, your address, your taxpayer identification number, and then also your contact information. And below that, this will be found on your PPP promissory note or your loan documents, and there will be the SBA PPP loan number. And a lot of loan documents have these called either SBA loan number or PPP loan number. It will be one of the two. And then the lender loan number. Some loan documents have had these, some haven't. So if you ask your bank, they will be able to provide you the lender number. The loan amount, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. This is the amount that is on your loan document and also came into your bank account. And then the loan disbursement date. So this is the date that your loan actually hit, that your funds actually hit the bank. And then your employees at the time of loan application and forgiveness application. These are actually numbers that look to just be kind of an information grab by the SBA. There's no real, they won't be used in any calculation, but you're going to use head count for these. So however many employees that you had at the time of loan application and however many you had at the time of forgiveness, you'll enter that head count for those. And then we'll go down to the idle advance. So the idle advance, if any of you applied for an idle advance in addition to the PPP, this is where you'll enter the amount you received there. So we have another question. It looks like, and if self-employed, that's just one person? Yes. So that would be just one person on here. And actually read some banks. So when we've been going through this with clients, some banks have considered owners. So a freelance person would be an owner. Have considered them as a zero count for the employees. So just see how it reads on the application when you're filling it out. They may have you put zero there in this amount for this.
So what we're seeing is that each bank is a little bit different.
Right.
So each bank's tweak the form a little bit and have a little bit different requirements.
Yeah. So it'll be good to consult with them as you're going through this process. That's another good question for idle. Is that the loan or is that the $1,000 that I received? So the advance, and I'll back up by saying the idle advance was based on how many employees you had, and they gave out $1,000 per employee up to 10 employees. So if you received $1,000, you probably had yourself as the one employee, and that will be included here in the idle advance amount. So that was not the loan, that was the advance.
So they would only enter $1,000 now?
Yes, so you would only enter $1,000 here for the advance. Don't enter the loan amount here. And then you'll use the idle application number. And then, so Going below that, the payroll schedule, and this is where it may be different for a lot of people who are with freelance, because you may not pay yourself on a regular weekly, bi-weekly, or twice a month schedule. You'll actually most likely have to check the other box. And in the other, when you're going through the application forms, what we run into with a lot of banks is they want to know if you're either more frequent than bi-weekly or less frequent than bi-weekly, how you pay yourself. So when you check this box, you will probably answer either more frequently or less frequently than bi-weekly. Below that, we're going down to the covered period. So the covered period, we have a familiar number there. So the date on the covered period will be the same as our PPP loan disbursement date. So whatever you put for that disbursement date, the day your funds hit the bank account, you also have for the beginning of the covered period. And then that will go out 24 weeks. The alternative covered period, I'm going to ignore for now because it won't apply to most of you, and that was more put in place for the 8 weeks. And then the next part probably won't apply to most of you either. So if you had a loan in excess of $2 million, then you'll check that box. Right? So if you didn't, make sure you don't check that box.
Why is that important now?
So loans that are over $2 million will receive more scrutiny by the SBA. So make sure you don't check that box. Okay, so now we'll get to the fun part for us accountants, the calculation. So the top part will be your payroll costs, which in the previous slide, Trish had defined payroll costs. So that the definition will be the same here. And then your non-payroll costs will be your business mortgage interest payments, the rent or lease payments, and then your business utility payments. And then line 5, so these are you're going to have 3 forgiveness calculations. Line 5 will be the sum of your payroll and non-payroll costs. Line 6 will be the actual loan amount. And then line 7, what line 7 is doing is just making sure that you used at least 60% on payroll. So you're going to divide line 1, so that's your payroll cost, by 0.6 to make sure you got that requirement in. And whatever you're on that last line there, your forgiveness amount is the lesser of these 3 options. And just one note is whatever you put for that idle advance. So for example, we had the question that received 1,000. If you have 10,000 for a forgiveness amount, ultimately you're going to only have 9,000 forgiven. So just know that. Okay, so now to owner's compensation. So let's see. So we have another question here we'll get to. Would the monthly fee that I pay for co-working spaces qualify as business rent, or would I need an office lease agreement? So we actually have run into this, and again, this is you want to work with your bank on this, but if you can show that workspace was in place before February 15th, that's the important part. And the banks we've been working with have accepted that for rent. So that's another good question. So moving on to owner's compensation, which this is where most of you will calculate your payroll costs. So this owner's compensation has 2 different categories. So most of you will either fall into Schedule C or S Corp shareholders. And so those are the 2 types of wage. Schedule C will you'll derive your wages from 2019 net income. So as you can see here, this box that we have highlighted, that's where you're going to pick up your wages.
So Nels, what's the difference between wages defined for Schedule C or an S Corp?
So an S Corp will be based on the wages you actually paid during the covered period. So your W-2 type wages so not distributions or any of that, just the W-2 wages that you paid during the covered period. And Schedule C is not based on the amount you paid yourself, but you're looking back to 2019 net income and doing 2.5 months worth of that, and that will be your wages for for Schedule C. And
What if I file Schedule C, but I have a net loss, but I do have employees on staff that I pay W-2? How does that work?
so if you have W-2 wages and you may have a net loss on here, you will use those so you'll actually use the amount that you paid during the cover period. So you won't use this net loss for the purpose of the calculation for your covered period, but you'll use the wages that are paid during that period.
Then am I still, if I use wages instead of my net profit if I'm the Schedule C, do I still get to pull in rent and other types of expenditures?
Yeah, so if you're using the wages, then you'll still be able to use those non-payroll costs.
So back to the question we received, if they're going to use net profit divided by 12 times 2.5 months, they don't have to worry about the other pieces then.
Right. So if you're using if you're a Schedule C, then actually you won't be able to use and you're using your net income for purposes of your original application. You actually won't be able to use those non-payroll costs. But it won't matter because it's 2.5 months that you got the application for, and then 2.5 months for forgiveness. Okay, so we have a question here. My accountant has my S Corp set up, so I receive a W-2. Is this number that I need to use correct? Is this the number that I need to use? So
now with a W-2 and an S Corp, if they're the owner, is there any limits on the amount they can use?
Yeah, so that's another good question. So you'll look at your 2019 W-2 wages to see what your cap is. And so it'll be based off of, the first cap is based off of 2.5 months of your 2019 W-2 wages. And then you're further capped by $100,000.
So if my W-2 says $150,000, I can only potentially use up to $100,000 for the calculation.
Right, so you'd only be able to use 100. And what 100,000 works out to be when you throw in 2.5 months worth of that is $20,833. So most of you will probably see that. A lot of you will probably see that cap. So here's a few strategies for keeping it simple. We recommend that people, since now you have 24 weeks to provide, it provides plenty of time to expend the funds that were based on only 2.5 months worth of payroll. So if you only use payroll costs, it will cut down on a lot of those extra documentations that you'd have to provide the bank. So that's step one, and then the other would be you can even further simplify it by only taking the gross wages from those payroll costs. So if you leave out healthcare, retirement benefits, and those employer state taxes, you won't have to gather as many documents for the bank. Is there an advantage to setting up a separate bank account for the PPP funds? So originally we did think that there would be an advantage. The advantage is that you'll have less cash to show to pay out, so you only have one bank statement to show. But there really is no advantage beyond that. We've seen it done both ways. So for example, if you have a payroll account that comes out of a payroll bank account, and it's separate from what you're using maybe non-payroll costs out of for your operations, it's not that big of a deal. Just provide both bank statements when you're doing the forgiveness documentation. So it won't be a big deal. So now we'll get on to documentation.
So we'll go over a little bit of the documentation that's required when you submit your application for forgiveness. Not only do you have to do the application that Nels just went over, but you do have to gather and submit the support for those numbers for the bank. So for payroll, they'll want bank statements and payroll reports showing that cash was actually paid to employees if you have employees, or if you're an S Corp and pay yourself wages. They'll look for canceled checks, statements for employer contributions to health and retirement benefits. So if you get something from the provider, they'll want to see that. If you're a Schedule C, and basing it on net profit, they'll want your 2019 Schedule C from your 1040 tax return. And then for payroll, they'll also want to see the 941s that were filed and any state unemployment taxes that were filed. And then for other payroll that you won't see in the payroll, again, to talk again about the health insurance and retirement plans, they'll want to see canceled checks for those, as well as anything documenting that it was the employer's portion going to that. You cannot receive forgiveness on the employee's withholdings to pay for those benefits, only what the employer matches or pays. And then they'll want to see a calculation of your full-time equivalents on January 1st through the end of your cover period. And that's to make sure you don't have any of those reduction limitations. So you'll have to submit that with your application. And then for non-payroll costs, so for mortgage, they'll want to see a lender amortization schedule, account statements, and canceled checks. For rent or leases, they'll want to see the agreement and then canceled checks. Same with utilities, the invoices that substantiate your utilities plus canceled checks. So they're trying to verify that both it was incurred and paid. So that's why they want the source document of invoices and statements, and then also the canceled checks. And then just remember, all non-payroll documentation must have been in place before February of 2020. So what that means is they don't want new lease agreements, new spaces rented after you receive the PPP funds. They want to make sure it's the same type of expenditures you had in February of 2020 that you're paying now, that you're not entering into related party leases that aren't covered, things like that. If I work from home, and any of my home office expenses applicable. So if you work from home and you're a Schedule C, those will be reduced for under your net profit. But if you aren't a Schedule C and you work from home, then
the other thing is a lot of those will probably not be in the name of your business. So it could be difficult to prove those. So we're recommending that probably it'd be better not to include those on your application. And as we mentioned, the 24 weeks really does provide quite a bit of time for you to be able to use those payroll costs. So we would recommend probably not to include those home office type expenditures.
yeah, if they're not, we've consulted with a few banks and they said the agreements and the bills, the invoices, the utility bills have to be in the name of the business. So if it doesn't match the business name that you put on the application and the EIN, then they probably will deny those as non-payroll, forgivable non-payroll. And then this is the tool that Paula mentioned in the beginning that she keeps putting the bot up for. This is our forgiveness tool that we created that you all are welcome to download. And what it does, it helps gather the information needed to submit to the bank, as well as walks you through the numbers that you're calculating on that forgiveness application. But it links it all together. So it links and lets you explain to the bank what you're submitting to them, the name of the document, and it just really helps to put it all together.
So now we've talked about how to do the application. So how do you record this all on your books? So when you receive the PPP, and we'll get into a little accounting here. So when you receive the PPP, you're going to debit the cash because you received the money for the proceeds, and then you're going to credit a Ppp loan liability account. And you'll need to create this account because it didn't exist before. And then as funds are expended, you're going to record these expenses as you normally would any other expenses, but do try to track these. And it'll be important to track these because they will not be deductible on your tax return. We have a question here. As a sole proprietor, I pay myself by direct transfer from business accounts to personal. What would be the payroll proof? Would I have to transfer for equal parts over a covered period, or can it be lump sum? So as a sole proprietor, I'm guessing you're probably Schedule C. I'm assuming that. And so for that, you would actually just need to provide that 2019 Schedule C. So it wouldn't actually matter how you transferred the money, because they're going to base your compensation replacement, is what they're calling it, off of that 2019 Schedule C. And then, so I get it. On this, one thing to remember is you can, a lot of software like QuickBooks Online has the ability to set up classes. So you may be able to track these expenditures and special to PPP, like make a PPP class or something like that. When the loan is forgiven, you're going to debit the PPP loan liability. So you're going to clear it off your books for the amount forgiven, and then credit an other income account. And just remember this, this will not be taxable. And that's the reason that your expenses are not deductible.
So I know many of you, this probably doesn't apply, but many of you might sit on not-for-profit boards. So the not-for-profit accounting is a little bit different. The first step, you get the cash and you recognize the loan. But as in a not-for-profit, as soon as you have expended all the funds for the purpose, you can recognize it as revenue. Where for businesses, if you're an S Corp, you will not get to remove that loan liability and bring it into income until the bank approves your forgiveness. So that's just a little bit of a difference, that if you sit on any boards, you might see it handled differently in a not-for-profit financial statement versus your own accounting.
So we wanted to provide you with a few financial resources. And we recommend that when you're looking for financial resources, start with the Economic Development Council. And we provided here the websites for our local EDCs, so Sarasota and Tampa. But we encourage you, wherever you are in the nation, to go ahead and look to your local EDC. The other resource is the Small Business Association. So they have loans directly through the SBA. And let's see, I'll get to this question here. So I received a grant from my city government that was intended to provide relief to small businesses affected by COVID-19. Is there a specific way I should account for these funds in my record keeping?
So you would recognize them as income on your P&L, and then you would have to go back to your local city to see if there was any reporting requirements, if they needed anything back from you to substantiate what you spent the money on. That would be the only reporting requirements, is if they dictated something within that grant you received. Otherwise, you would recognize it as grant income, as income on the current year when you received it.
That's good. So the SBA, they do provide, in addition to assistance with loans, they do have some nice resources that also address a lot of the frequently asked questions that people have regarding both the EIDL loans and then the PPP loans. So the EIDL advance, as you can see here, is no longer available. So they have actually run out of funds, but the EIDL loan is still available.
Okay, this question. I received an EIDL advance and was approved for a loan, but have not accepted it. But the more COVID goes on, the greater concern I have. Is it too late to accept the loan or apply for a new one? So if you were approved for an EIDL and received the advance and your time span ran out for the EIDL, you cannot apply for a new EIDL because you declined the opportunity to receive that first one. Now, if your timeline has not run out for that EIDL and they're still contacting you about a loan still out there, then you could accept it.
So that portal is still open. Oh, and how can I use the EIDL loan funds? So that's a good question, because the EIDL loan has specific uses that they can only be used for operating expenses. And then, as we mentioned earlier, if you're you cannot distribute the funds. You cannot distribute any of those.
So if you're an S Corp, and you're an S Corp owner, and you cannot receive any distributions from that S Corp during the time that you have an EIDL loan out there.
Yes. And another strange item, but probably worth mentioning because we've run into this, is you cannot use these on international inventory. So if you have other resources available, so you have to go to the other resources first, and then you may be able to look at the international inventory, but just know that writing is in there as well. It's a little thing that we've run into. So finally, we'll talk about financial empowerment, and this is just first of all, we recommend that you surround yourself with a good team and create a plan. And so a good team could consist of legal counsel, a financial advisor, and an accountant. Of course, we have to say an accountant. And then keep calm and PPP on, so that share your confusions with your team. So if you run into something, make sure that you share these confusions with your team.
And we found that the banks are very helpful. So go to your bank, whatever bank you received your funding from. Their teams have been very good with answering questions, finding out, going to their resources. So don't be afraid to ask the bank questions. They're not going to hold it against you on your forgiveness. They want everybody to get the most that they can. They understand it's hard times with what's going on. So don't be afraid to reach out to your local lender.
That's a good point. And then another thing is, if it's possible, start building up reserves. And then lastly, find the minimum cost that it takes for your business to survive, and create a worst case scenario plan.
We just have a couple takeaways from today. You have 24 weeks to spend the funds. We recommend spending the funds over that time frame to make it for ease, so you don't have to provide all the other documentation. So if you don't have to include non-payroll costs, don't. And then your EDC, your local EDC, is a great resource. So visit their websites and find out everything that's available from your local counties, cities. There's a lot of resources out there. And thank you for having us today. And if there's any questions, we'll be happy to keep answering questions.
Let me check right here. We have one more question. Stand by.
So sorry, but one more. Since my LLC, I use Schedule C, provides the only income for my household living expenses, can I use it to pay those expenses such as electric, insurance, etc.? And you really can, because as a Schedule C, you're using that compensation replacement. So you're looking back to your 2019 Schedule C to figure out what your wages for purposes of this loan are. So once you have this, you really will be able to spend those funds on whatever you need to spend those funds for.
They really consider your net bottom line on your Schedule C as your wages, as your wage replacements. So that's what they're considering as wages for a Schedule C. So you don't really have to transfer money around. That's what they're going to use for the forgivable piece.
Yeah. That's a question that we've received quite a bit, so that's a good one.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any more questions popping up currently. One thing that I just wanted to note, in working in the freelance community, initially I talked with some of my peers, and they were a bit apprehensive to take advantage of the PPP. For whatever reason, they thought that it wasn't meant for them, or maybe some other businesses were suffering a bit more and they didn't want to take advantage of funds. What is your advice, and do you think, as this continues to go on longer, will there be other opportunities to apply for things like this? And should freelancers reconsider if they had that mindset previously?
I definitely think they should reconsider if they had that mindset before, because as we see this is continuing, it's impacting all types of businesses. There's some lag time in different businesses. Some businesses are just starting to see the impact now. So I would definitely take advantage of what's out there. The PPP funds have run out, but there could be another stimulus package. you never know what Congress is going to do, but there could be. Our local Sarasota County just is opening up their CARES Act funding, and so it's $10,000 to $20,000 that local businesses, if they have under 100 employees, can apply for. So your different counties and cities probably still have some CARES Act funding. They are still receiving federal funds coming into the different counties and states, and so just again, go to those resources, see what's out there, and I would not be afraid to apply for it.
And I noticed some of the different arts alliances in the counties, as you say, have offered those. I think that Lowe's even had something that they had several rounds through that, there are different funding sources out there. So just to take advantage of those as you can.
Right, I would agree.
Has there been any client that you've worked with in any instance where there would be a downside to applying?
I think for purposes of the PPP, the clients probably that would have would be those that would be over a threshold where there would be more, just to have more scrutiny on a loan, I think would be a little bit more difficult. But most sole proprietors will probably be under those thresholds.
It would just, and I wouldn't say we would discourage them. It would just be a lot more record keeping and time consuming for the clients. They kind of have to weigh the cost benefit if they're over those audit thresholds. So if they have to get an audit by the SBA, it's just a lot more paperwork. They'll have to bring in their accountants to help them gather it and provide the information to the SBA.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate our accountants. Freelancers could not run their businesses without their accountants and their lawyers and their IT people. You guys have the expertise that we don't, certainly, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we enjoyed that.
All right. Well, with that, that wraps up, I believe, our talks for today. Tune in tomorrow for our closing days events of Freelance Business Week, and we appreciate your time today. Have a good evening.